Hey there, this is James with Carps Bees, and I did a presentation to my beekeeping group the other day, and it was about walkaway splits, and it was received pretty positively. So I decided to go ahead and convert that over to a YouTube video / presentation, and I posted it, and I got a lot of positive feedback and some comments that said, hey, why don't you do some more videos like that? We found it very informative. So I decided that I would go ahead and do another one. This one is really just a quick guide to understanding honeybees, and specifically the different species of honeybees, the types of honeybees, and the various roles that they play throughout their life cycle. So really wanted to focus in on that. I've received a lot of questions as a beekeeper from non-beekeepers of just basic questions about bees. And sometimes, I understand if you're not immersed into bees, some things don't make a lot of sense or confusing and need clarity. So that was the idea behind this presentation, is just to provide some basic clarity about the roles of bees. So that's what we're going to get into today. So let me go ahead and get started and share some information with you. So first of all, I just want to talk about the species of honeybees and their origins. So where did these bees come from? Well, they come from Southeast Asia and the Philippines originally. We have some very old fossils, but the oldest fossil is 34 million years old. And we know that the range of honeybees has expanded over time from Southeast Asia all the way west into Europe, down into Africa, all the way to North and South America. One of the interesting facts I ran into, though, about honeybees in North and South America is that honeybees actually were never in North and South America when humans were there. We have found a fossil of a honeybee in Nevada, but that fossil predates human beings being in North America. So they weren't there. Something must have happened to those bees. They must have died out. It wasn't until Europeans brought over honeybees from Europe where we ended up getting honeybees again. So I just thought that was a really interesting fact. So, and if you look at this map here, you can see the range of honeybees is far and wide. Only in the most extreme cold areas, so the North and South Pole. Certainly Antarctica is not going to have any native bees. And then the very, very hot parts of the map. So if you think of the Sahara Desert in Africa, no honeybees there. But pretty much everywhere else, we got lots and lots of bees. So another really fascinating thing, and a reason that I think honeybees are just so darn special, is there are over 20,000 species of bees in the world. And of those 20,000 species of bees, only eight are considered honeybees. And then of those eight, only just two are domesticated by humans. So if you go buy a jar of honey, it has to come from one of those two domesticated types of honeybees. So the two types here on the left, we have Apis mellifera, or the Western or European honeybee. And on the right, we have Apis cerana, or the Eastern honeybee. And if you look at the pictures here, you can see they look very similar, but they do have some slight differences. I think Apis cerana is just a little smaller than their cousin on the left here, the European honeybee. And so I did a little research, and I found a really neat little study that did a comparison. And I'll show you here what it is. So there were a lot of things in there. I just picked some of the most interesting facts. But from a pollen load perspective, the amount of pollen an individual bee can carry, the Western honeybee can carry twice as much as the Eastern honeybee. And from an amount of honey produced by an average colony per year, the Western honeybee can produce almost 3 times as much honey as the Eastern honeybee. The Eastern honeybee produces a lot less eggs, as you can see here. The queen will produce 900 eggs a day in a Western honeybee hive versus 310 for Eastern. As far as swarming goes, and if you're not familiar with swarming, when when a hive gets too cramped, the colony will decide to leave, and that's called a swarm. So it's a big deal for beekeepers because, we could lose all our bees. That's not fun. So we always try to stay ahead of our bees and make sure they have enough space and they don't want to swarm. But it turns out less of that type of activity happens with the Western versus the Eastern honeybee. As far as aggressiveness, the Western honeybee is less aggressive than the Eastern. Now, I walked out to my apiary today and I had some pretty aggressive bees that would have liked to sting me if I wasn't wearing my bee suit, but apparently the Eastern are even more aggressive. And then as far as recovery after dearth, and what a dearth is, it's just a period of time where there's very few resources available to the bees out in the environment. So, I'm here in the plains of the United States in Kansas, and, our early August is kind of like this, where it's very, very hot. Our sunflowers haven't come up yet. There's really no pollen or, no flowers to go get nectar and resources from. So bees kind of have to make it through those dearth periods, and their numbers can reduce, and their colonies can weaken a bit. So what is the recovery like after that? It turns out Western bees recover pretty quick versus the Eastern ones a little slower. So there's a comparison of the two types of bees that people are out there keeping across the planet and making a living off of, I would assume. So pretty interesting stuff. So just 2 out of 2,000 species of bees are where all your honey comes from. Think about that. So the types of honeybees, and what I mean here are the social caste is what kind of the official terminology is. So I think most people are familiar with a queen bee, but what a lot of people believe is that the queen is kind of in charge of the hive or the colony. And that's really, really not true. The queen is just one role within a colony. And a good way to think of a colony is kind of as a super organism. It's really the colony or the hive that's alive versus any individual bee. If you compare that to yourself, as your human body, as an organism, you have a brain, but you have hands and you have, eyes and all your other parts, and they all have roles to play. Well, the same is true here in the super organism, a honeybee hive. So the queen has her role to play. Yes, there's typically only one queen per hive, but she's not necessarily in charge. Her job is to get mated, and then she'll have all the eggs she needs for the rest of her life, which is up to 3 to 4 years. And her job is to lay eggs and make baby bees. And those baby bees are what power that hive and keep it running. So that's why she's so critically important. Now, if she happens to die, the other bees can feed a special substance called royal jelly to an egg or a very small larvae and turn that bee into a queen bee. So that's how they can make it if the queen happens to die. Now, if that hive just so happens doesn't have any eggs or little larvae, then guess what? They will die off. There's no way for that hive to survive unless a beekeeper comes in and figures out a way to combine them with another hive. So queen, very, very important, critical, but not really in charge. Let's see, the worker bees are next. So these are the bees that do all the heavy lifting for a colony, and they're all female, turns out. So they have varying different roles throughout their lifespan. They only live about a month, 4 to 5 weeks typically. But they have a lot of different jobs that they do. And I'm going to talk about that on the next slide here. They are tied to their queen or the colony, and how they're tied to that is based on the smell or the pheromone that the queen releases. So that unique pheromone smell distinguishes them from any other hive. So, for example, if another bee from another hive decides to try to come in to a hive, the bees of the resident hive will know they don't smell like the rest of us, and they will boot them out and get rid of them, prevent them from coming in. So those are the workers. And then we have drones, which are the males, and they have one job only, and that's to mate with a queen. So when a new queen is born, she's a virgin queen, she will do what's called a mating flight. She will fly off to a location where there's a bunch of drones. Drones will attempt to mate with her. Several probably will. Once that drone mates with that queen, the queen will fly back to her hive. She'll probably be good to go and stay in there for most of the rest of her life unless they swarm. But the drone, after mating, he's done. He's going to die. So his job is over. Some other interesting things about drones are they don't have stingers. So one of the things that, will happen with little kids is you can find a drone, it's big fat bees, and give them little kids to play with to get familiar with bees and not have to worry about them being stung. The other thing that drones do is they're not specifically tied to a hive. They tend to travel from hive to hive. So they're a little different than the other bees in that regard. And really why they're doing that? Well, they just want to be fed. They're looking for resources. So that's why they do that. One of the dangers with that, though, especially with some of the newer diseases that have emerged.
It's 23:30.
One of the dangers with that, especially with some of the newer diseases that have emerged for honeybees, is that they can now be a carrier for those diseases or pests and take them from hive to hive. So that's not really a good thing. The other interesting thing is you're not going to see drones in winter. So if you live in any of the northern climes of the world, and you're raising bees or where it's cold, and you have a winter, then there's no drones in there. As a matter of fact, the rest of the bees will boot them out. Why? Because they're not mating. They're not needed. And one of the things the queen can do is she can actually choose what type of egg to lay, a worker or a drone. So in spring, she'll choose to lay some more drones. So they boot them out. And drones typically live about the same amount of time as your worker bee. So again, 4 to 5 weeks, about a month. So there's a debate about this fourth social caste of bee, the winter body bee or the fat body bee. And so most of the literature will talk about queens and workers and drones and leave out this winter body bee. But there's good arguments to be made that this is its own caste of bee. And, now I've seen it. So, and I'm in the camp that believes that it should be distinctly different than the others. And what a winter body bee is, again, if you live in one of those areas where you have a winter and it gets cold, in fall, what you're going to see are these workers kind of get much fatter. And so they're all female. They are a version of a worker, but they produce this special substance, and I'm sure I'm going to slaughter the name here, but it's called vitiligenin. And what that is that's actually a pollen substitute that they can actually produce from their bodies. So it replaces pollen that they would bring in from the environment. So if they're low on pollen in the late winter and they need it, then these bees can produce that. So that's a very unique thing that these winter body bees can do. So they're climate adapted. You won't see them show up if you live in Hawaii, for example, where you don't have a winter. But in the colder places you will. And these bees live up to 5 months. So, that'll pretty much get you through most of the coldest, longest winters out there. So that's why we have these winter body bees to help the hive, the colony survive through the winter. So those are the different social castes of bees. Now let's talk more about those workers and some of the different jobs they have. And these jobs are typically determined by the age of the bee. So when a new worker emerges from a cell, some of the jobs that they typically have are, first, it's a nurse bee. So a nurse bee attends to the eggs and larvae, make sure they have food and there's nothing bothering them or anything like that. And that's a good job for a new bee because new bees are tiny, they're fuzzy, some of them can't even fly yet. So you'll just see them walking around the comb. If for some reason they get dropped outside of the hive, they can't make their way back because they just don't know how to fly or get back. Some of the other jobs they could have is an undertaker bee. So bees are extremely clean. They do not want anything nasty inside their colony in the hive. So if a bee happens to die in there, you'll see these undertaker bees be very quick about grabbing that dead bee and taking it outside and throwing it off their landing board. So that's one of the jobs that you'll see younger bees have. And then queen attendant, which is just making sure that the queen is clean and that she's fed. So they'll follow the queen around and take care of her. Kind of a nice job, I guess. When they get a little older, more towards middle age, then there's some other jobs that they can take on. So pollen packing is one. When forager bees bring pollen from flowers back into the hive, they typically just drop it in the closest location. So those bees might take it, move it to a better location where it can be used more efficiently. And then they want to kind of pack that pollen down into the cell. So that's a job that they do. Honey sealing. So honey sealing is another job that they can do. So honey has to have a certain low moisture content, under 20% typically, before it could be considered honey. Once it hits that moisture content though, these bees will place a wax seal over that cell, and basically that honey will stay good in there for any of our lifetimes. So I don't know if it will last forever, but it will. I'll put a guarantee on it that it'll be for as good as long as we're alive. So, and that wax seal is really important part of that process. And then the way they get that wax seal is they excrete wax from their body. There's a special gland that they get it from. Those same bees can also be building honeycomb with that wax. So a couple related types of jobs there. Another important job, this is also related to honey production, is fanning. So again, to get moisture down in the hive, it helps to have a little breeze or air flowing over the comb. So you'll see bees with their butts in the air and flapping their wings, and you hear this loud buzz. That's fanning. So that's what they're doing. And the other reason they might do fanning is just to cool the hive off. You know, I live here in Kansas, the middle of the plains of the United States. Boy, in August, it's hot, you know, so the bees get hot too. So they can use fanning to help, you know, reduce the temperature of the hive. Now, when these worker bees get to a later stage of their life, some of the jobs that they might be doing then are things like foraging. So most of the bees that we come in contact with are forager bees, out gathering resources from the environment. So nectar and pollen would be the primary resources that they're trying to get. And they'll make many, many flights in a day back and forth to the hive to do that foraging type of activity. The other thing they may do is be guard bees, which these are pretty neat bees. If you ever watch a landing board where the entrance to a hive is, you'll see these guard bees. They're very much on alert. They can stand on their hind legs. They're sniffing or feeling every bee that comes into the hive. And if they don't recognize the smell, or they think that something shouldn't be there, like a wasp or something like that, then they will attack. And they will attack sometimes the beekeeper too. So they're there to protect the hive. So those are the guard bees. And then usually one of the last jobs a bee will have before it passes away is a water carrier bee. So they have a special place in their body, compartment in their body, where they can go get a sip of water, zip it back to the hive, help the hive stay hydrated. Interesting, if you look at water carrying bees up close, what you'll often see is like their wings are all tattered on the end. So you can tell that bee's probably had a lot of jobs, been through a lot of stuff in their 4 to 5 weeks of life. So one of the last jobs there. So that's a little bit about the origins of bees, the species, the caste, the roles here. There are other roles as well. I'm not going to cover them all, but these are some of the basic ones. In doing this research, I ran across a few interesting facts, some of which I've already discussed, but I put a list together. So let me share that with you. So first of all, I mentioned that they don't need drones in winter. So basically they're murdered. Ooh, so that's rough. So all the females get together, boot the males out. So they're gone. The other neat thing is that guard bees will give you a warning. So I call it a warning shot. So, and I've experienced this many, many times where I'm walking out to my apiary and, you know, just out of the blue, a bee will kind of hit me in the side of the head. Won't sting me, just hit me. And I think that's the guard bee's way of saying, hey, you know, we don't want you here. Get lost, buddy. And if I have to do this again, I'm going to sting you. They probably don't want to die. You know, they sting you, they die. So, so that's the warning shot. If you look at the picture here that's on this slide, you'll see, you know, what looks like typical bees, but bees can have a variety of color schemes to them. You know, you have yellows and blacks and kind of gold and orange all together on these bees. So there's different kind of patterns and colors that show up. A good example of that is I was doing something called open feeding when I first started beekeeping, which is you put some sugar water in the middle of all your hives and all the bees can come get it. And when I was observing the bees that were coming to get the sugar water, they were all this really dark black color. None of them looked like my bees, which were these more striped bees. And sure enough, I looked at all my hives and nowhere were there any of these dark black bees. So these are some other bees coming and I was feeding them. So who knows where they're from. Bees are democratic. I talked a little bit about swarming earlier. That whole process of swarming and finding a new home, well, it requires a vote and it has to be a unanimous vote. So these bees will go look for a hole in a tree or another box to live in or something. And once they find a good location, they will come back. They'll do something called a waggle dance, which communicates the location of that new home and additional information like how good that new home is. Other bees will observe the dance. They don't trust that bee. They will go fly out. They'll investigate it. They'll come back. And if enough bees start doing the same waggle dance, you kind of have these competing coalitions for a new location. Once one overtakes the other and all the bees are doing the same dance, they all head out, they leave, they swarm, they go to the new location. So they're very democratic in terms of that process. We've talked about the hive being a living, superorganism, so I'm not going to go over that one again. I also talked about bees moving stuff around the hive, like pollen, for example. Well, they move all this stuff around. So whether it's honey or nectar or pollen, they try to get it in the most optimal location. You'll actually pull frames out of a hive and you'll see this rainbow pattern where all the brood's in the middle and then I'll have a layer of the resources all the way around it. And that's because the bees are repositioning those resources. They're really good at warehousing their stuff. Foragers just come in, dump it off wherever they can as quick as possible so they can get off and get more stuff. So a lot of, forklifting going around. Bees are robbers. So, they're looking for the path of least resistance to nutrition. So they will test the defenses of other hives. And I see this happening in my apiary all the time. That's why those guard bees are so important. So if they can get in there and steal some resources and take advantage of another colony's hard work, they will do that. And if they get past the defenses, get back to their hive, they're going to tell all their buddies and all their buddies are going to show up. Next thing you know, you have thousands of bees descending upon a weaker hive and they can get completely raided out in not very long, an hour. So something to keep an eye on. They're always testing the defenses, I guess. Bees dance, I mentioned that waggle dance. Interesting fact about that waggle dance is if you can actually draw it on a piece of paper and accurately predict where this bee is telling you to go. And there's a lot to it. You can research more. Maybe I'll do a video on that specifically, but it turns out there's only 2 organisms in the world that do that, and it's bees and humans that communicate in that way. So bees are pretty smart. Bees poop. Yep. You might have heard something called a cleansing flight. It means a bee goes outside of the hive and take a little dump. What it looks like is a streak of yellow, especially in winter. You'll see them do it and you'll see little streaks in the snow, or maybe you'll see this on your car sometimes. But yeah, they have to get rid of that material out of their bodies, and they try to do it outside the hive. Actually, they always do it outside the hive unless they're trapped or something. That would be horrible. So again, they're very clean animals. Bees do have preferences for what they eat. Most people think, oh, bees love honey. And sure, they like honey, but it's not their preference. They want to get carbohydrates as easily as possible. It turns out one of their most favorite things is just plain old sugar water. If they can get to sugar water, that's going to be what they're going to prefer. And honey, as much as they love it, is going to be one of the last things they go for. It's really their resource of last, resort. That's why, it's kind of sealed up and stored for winter. That's why they make it, I think. So that's why I don't feel too bad as a beekeeper taking some frames of honey from bees, as long as I'm going to feed them some other things, so they're okay. Bees leave to die. So I think I mentioned this, maybe I didn't. The undertaker bees will take a dead bee out of a hive, but bees don't want to die inside their hive. They know that instinctually that's going to be bad for the superorganism, the colony. So one of the last things they'll do is fly off into nature and die away from the hive, never to return. So kind of sad, but the ultimate sacrifice for the health of the colony. And then another thing that people may not realize is that all bees get royal jelly. Royal jelly is not just reserved for the queen. It's the amount that makes the difference. So if a little egg or larvae gets a lot of royal jelly, then it's going to turn into a queen. If it's just a little, I mean, just a regular bee, but all bees get royal jelly. So there you have it. Some additional facts. Hope you found this fun and helpful. I enjoyed doing the research and putting this together. Let me know if you have any comments or questions, or you think anything I said was wrong. I'd love to hear it. And if you like this and you want me to keep producing these types of videos, then please click subscribe. If you click subscribe, you'll get notified when I put out new videos. So thanks a bunch. James from Scarp's Bees signing off here. Have a great one.